of the day to me that you start to look ahead more so at the narratives. What are the big conversations going into this weekend? And what could be the big conversations coming out? And so when I look at this coming weekend, what I want to do is talk about the game to me that I think by far is the most interesting and the one with the most interesting storylines. And it's not the game that I think most people are going to be talking about going into the weekend. It's not A&M Alabama. It's not Texas Oklahoma. To me, it is a top 25 matchup in Baton Rouge, 11 a.m. Eastern. Shame on the SEC for making this one at 11 a.m. Central, I should say, noon Eastern, as LSU is hosting a top 10 Tennessee team. And why this game is interesting to me, I think, you look at those two other games that I just mentioned. I don't know that there's really any narrative that would really, I think, be like jarring to the world of college football coming out of Texas, Oklahoma. And I don't really know that there'd be a really jarring narrative coming out of Alabama A&M unless A&M somehow pulls the upset. And even then, Bryce Young might not play. What does it all mean? All that good stuff. But Tennessee-LSU, you think about everything that's at stake for both these programs with first or second year head coaches, programs that I think both fan bases think that they are on the rise. Whew. You talk about what the conversation could be about either of these teams on Monday. Let's get into it because to me, again, this is the most fascinating game on the schedule by far. For Tennessee, listen, I'll tell you this. When I look at Tennessee, a couple things stand out. They are in the top 10 in the country. They are coming off a really, really, really impressive win against Florida a few weeks ago, obviously coming off of a bye. And if they were to win this game, I really do think that they would be officially the SEC program that is on the rise, that they're not quite Alabama. They're not quite Georgia. I'm not even saying they're anywhere close, but this is a program that won 7 games last year. As we've talked about many times, easily could have won a few more, could have beat Ole Miss at home, could have beat Pitt at home, ended up losing both because of weird situations. Hendon Hooker gets hurt early or doesn't play early in the game against Pitt. He gets hurt late in the game against Ole Miss. Well, if Tennessee, 7 wins last year, they start this year 5-0 with just their second win against Florida in the last 15 years, then they go to Baton Rouge. Oh, it's on. And Tennessee is officially one of the more fascinating programs in college football. Beyond that, what I would also say, I do think if Tennessee were to go to LSU and get a win, I'm just telling you right now, I think the Hendon Hooker Heisman talk, say that 10 times fast. That's the new Triple H, all right? I'm not a wrestling person. I don't know who the old Triple H is, but Hendon Hooker Heisman talk, that would be the buzz coming out of LSU because I don't see the scenario. Like, I don't see a game where Tennessee goes down to LSU and beats them, 14-12 or something like that. So for Tennessee to win these games, they are going to rely on their older veteran quarterback who is coming off an incredible game against Florida and has had an incredible season so far. Think about where the Heisman race is now and where it could become Monday if Tennessee gets this win. I think you can legitimately argue that Hendon Hooker might be the front runner right now as we speak this second. Nobody's really stepped up. Bryce Young's a little bit banged up. I guess CJ Stroud might be that guy, but Ohio State, I don't really feel like has had those super marquee games yet. I know they played Notre Dame early, but Notre Dame struggled out of the gate. I know they played Wisconsin a few weeks ago, but Wisconsin stinks. They just fired their coach. And so CJ Stroud's going to have time to build momentum throughout the year if he in fact does. But Bryce Young, I don't think is there yet. I don't get the vibe that Caleb Williams is there. And so you start to look at the Heisman. Tell me why, if Hendon Hooker has a big game coming out of this weekend, why we're not talking about Hendon Hooker as the favorite for the Heisman. Just think about it. Coming into the weekend, this is a guy that's completing 72% of his passes. This is a guy that has thrown 8 touchdowns, 0 interceptions, rushed for over 100 yards against Florida. And what he would have coming out of this weekend that I don't think CJ Stroud has, that I don't think Caleb Williams has right now, he'd have a couple signature wins in marquee games against good or at least interesting competition that we all know. Think about it. 2 weeks ago, played Florida, CBS, 3:30 game. Anthony Richardson is making all sorts of throws. Defense can't keep Florida off the field. What does Hendon Hooker do? Every time they need a play, he comes through, he delivers. Now he goes to LSU, even in a day game, and gets a win there. Oh, I think we're talking Hendon Hooker as the Heisman favorite coming out of Saturday if they were to get the win, because I do think he's going to have to put up big stats. By the way, if somehow Tennessee wins without Hendon Hooker putting up big stats, that's almost better because it feels like the defense then would have stepped up and made plays like they need. finally, what I would say, if Tennessee goes to Baton Rouge and beats LSU, I'm not saying it. I'm not saying it will happen. But I'm just going to tell you, I'm going to whisper it. I don't want to say it too loud. Do we have to start talking about Tennessee as a potential dark horse SEC East champion? No, I know. You're sitting there saying, you just drove off the road, Torres. You're out of your mind. What are you talking about? And I get where you would say that. Tennessee still has Alabama next week. That's at home. They still have Georgia later in the year. That's on the road. So I totally understand where you would say, I am insane for even considering the conversation. I guess my question would be this, though. I don't know that they beat Alabama, especially assuming Bryce Young is back. But tell me that they can't at least be interesting against Georgia. Let's say they go to LSU and win big and Hendon Hooker throws the ball all over the field. Let's say that Georgia beats Auburn, but Georgia's sloppy like they have been the last 2 weeks, and they beat Auburn, say 24-6, but they're not impressive, because I think that's part of the conversation as well. It's not just how well Tennessee appears to be playing coming into this one. It's the fact that Georgia has not looked that good the last few weeks. 22 points to Kent State the other day. Last week against Missouri, they win 26-22. They were down 22-9. I think they were down 19-9 going into the fourth quarter. They were down 10 points to Missouri going into the fourth quarter. Now, maybe they were just looking ahead to the rivalry game this week against Auburn. Maybe they were just whatever. But if you can be down by 10 to Missouri, you better not blink against Tennessee. They'll put up 10 points before you even can think. And so I'm not saying it will happen, but allow yourselves to dream, Tennessee fans. Close your eyes. Georgia is not the team that they were the last couple of years, and that doesn't mean that they're bad. I take that back. They're not the team that they were last year. We can argue, we can debate it. Should they be number one? Should they be number two? This is a team that's given up 22 points the last 2 weeks. The defense is not as good as they were a week ago, and I'll take it a step further. Outside of Brock Bowers, like sometimes the offense gets a little bit stagnant. And so again, maybe I'm overreacting. I know it's a pipe dream. I think we got to start talking about Tennessee as a dark horse to Atlanta, even though I think Georgia's the favorite. But if Tennessee gets this win, look at their schedule. They get Kentucky at home. They get Missouri at home. Vandy, South Carolina on the road. You can lose to Alabama. If you beat Georgia and you win all your other games, you're going to Atlanta. But I also think in a worst case scenario for Tennessee, you're looking at probably 10-2, worst case scenario if you get through this game 9-3. And I think we are talking about Tennessee as very much a program on the rise. Now let's look at what would happen if LSU won. And if LSU wins this game, let me just tell you this. All the blue check marks on Twitter that don't like Brian Kelly, for some reason, Brian Kelly is the least liked person on social media. I don't get it, okay? All this guy ever did was win a bunch of games at Notre Dame, and oh my goodness, he couldn't beat Alabama and Clemson. Guess what? Nobody beats Alabama and Clemson. But everybody hates Brian Kelly. Can you imagine the reaction if Brian Kelly wins this game to improve to 4-1 in year one at LSU? Ooh, actually, it'd be 5-1. I take that back. It'd be 5-1 because they would have played 6 games by now. They have not had their bye yet. They're 6-1. They'd be 5-1 through 6 games, and they would officially have the first super signature win of the Brian Kelly era. If they win this game, if LSU wins this game, here's what is not debatable. This program is ahead of schedule. The Brian Kelly hire was the right hire, and I'll tell you why. It's because think back to last year. Coach O was there. Obviously, we know Coach O, the good, the bad, the whatever. But they went 6-6 a year ago. They lost a lot of games that they shouldn't have, or a lot of games that LSU doesn't traditionally lose. They lost to Ole Miss. They lost to Arkansas. They lost to Kentucky. They lost to UCLA. Well, if LSU wins this game, it means that Brian Kelly is sitting at 5-1 a year after Coach O finished 6-6 overall. On top of that, it's worth noting, 5-1 against not an easy schedule. At that point, they would have a top 10 win over Tennessee. At that point, they would also obviously have a victory at Auburn, a team in Auburn that beat LSU a year ago. They'd have a victory over Mississippi State, a team that they've struggled with over the last couple of years since Mike Leach got there. Lost to them in 2020, barely survived a year ago. And so when I look at the situation with LSU, I think it's kind of the same as Tennessee. If they're to get this win, all of a sudden, I'm not saying they're the program on the rise. I'm not saying they beat Alabama, but look at the rest of their schedule. They'd be 5-1 overall. Next week, they do have Florida. Now, Florida's not an easy game, rivalry game. but they have won 3 of the last 4 against Florida, and they've won 2 of the last 3 in Gainesville. So it's not as though they go to Florida next week. It's impossible to beat Florida. They've done it several times in the last couple of years, even in down years, even in Gainesville, they have been able to get those wins. From there, you have a tough game against Ole Miss, and you have Bama, you have Arkansas, but you get A&M and UAB to end the year. And so right now you're 5-1. You beat Tennessee, you're 4-1. You beat Tennessee, you're 5-1. You got A&M, which looks beatable. You got UAB, which looks beatable. You got Florida, which looks beatable. I think all of a sudden then you're talking about, in a worst case scenario, year 1 under Brian Kelly, you're 8-4 coming off of a 6-6 year. By the way, a 6-6 year, remember, where you were down 1 million bodies by the end of the season, 1 million bodies by the bowl game. You started the season with this disappointing loss to Florida State, where you have all sorts of weird stuff and players are deleting their social media accounts after the game and taking LSU off their Instagram accounts. Now, all of a sudden, you're 5-1. You have a signature win. And I think you're building towards something not only for the back half of this season, but I think you're building towards potentially an 8-4 year. And if you can do that in year 1 under Brian Kelly, that is not only a very good sign, but think about what it could mean going forward. Think about what it could mean in recruiting. Think about when you're recruiting one against the Texas A&Ms of the world, the Texases of the world that are obviously up and down this year. Think about what that means going on the road with the confidence. Yeah, we were 8-4 this year, but give me another year. Give me time. Let me get my guys in. This is going to work. I went 8-4 with a patchwork roster that had a couple holdovers, a bunch of transfers, a transfer quarterback, a patchwork offensive line. Now, you're going to give me an offseason to start to build this roster my way? Oh, look out, LSU fans. So to me, I'm just telling you, this is the single most interesting game of the weekend in college football. I don't even think it's close. You can keep Bama A&M, which we're going to talk about in a minute. You can keep Texas, Oklahoma. I know it's the Red River and it's the Dallas and it's the Texas State Fair. The most interesting game of the weekend is Tennessee-LSU. Because if Tennessee wins, we're talking about them as very much a program on the rise. We're probably talking about Hendon Hooker as the Heisman Trophy favorite. And I think we're talking about Tennessee potentially as a dark horse SEC East winner, depending on what happens with Georgia. And if LSU wins, I think you're looking at worst, an 8-4 season. And all of a sudden, Brian Kelly's got momentum and all the haters have been proved wrong.